Hi everyone, thank you for attending this new live session of the Belgian Business Club. We hope you are doing well and you feel that better professional and personal times are ahead. My name is Jean-Baptiste Piron, and together with Alain Charbonnier, we are co-founder of the Belgian Business Club in Los Angeles. We help Belgian entrepreneurs to connect with the right professionals in the regions to stimulate business and enable networking. With the new administration in place, travel restrictions and vaccination ramping up around the world, we decided it was a good time to talk again about US immigration, a very popular topic because it concerns many of us and may impact your businesses. Let's first launch a quick poll to know more a bit about your status in the US. Do you have a visa, a green card? Are you a citizen? It is always interesting to know. And I will share the result in a few moments. And I launch the poll right now, so you can answer. I would like to also to remind you, as our audience is mostly composed with Belgian citizens, that the Consulate General of Belgium in Los Angeles is available to help you on consular matters, such as requesting new passports, and if you have questions in case you really need to travel to Belgium. You can find a lot of information on their website, belgiumintheusa.be, via their social media platforms, and their network of honorary consuls in the US can also help you. For the Belgians living on the east part of the US, you can contact the Embassy in Washington and the consulates in Atlanta and New York. And I would like to thank the Consul General of Belgium in Los Angeles, Ambassador Slowagen, who is attending our program today. And for this session, I have the pleasure to introduce you to our expert, Robert Blanco, who joins us today. Robert is a corporate and business immigration attorney and prepares both immigrants and non-immigrants petitions for skilled workers, executive managers, high net worth investors, and people of extraordinary ability in the arts, science, and business. His experience enables him to develop creative solutions for clients with complex immigration cases. Robert works within the RADCLIFF Myers team in Los Angeles. Today, we will try to cover most of the questions you previously sent to us by email, but do not hesitate to interact on the chat or in the Q&A box, and we will address your question during a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And just a reminder, since we talk about rapidly changing matters today, please note that the information we will share is valid right now, but might change due to government regulations or health concerns. And some situations are more complex than others. So if you feel that your questions were not totally covered today, you will be able to contact us after the session. The contact details will be provided on the last slide. So I will share the results of the poll right now. Just a moment. I hand the poll and I share the result with you. So we see that we have a lot of US citizens and green card holders today, and other, so maybe, I don't know, you will tell us later in the conversation. So Robert, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jean-Baptiste. Thank you for having me today. Let me share my screen. Okay. Thanks for having me today. I'm really happy to be here. Like Jean-Baptiste said, it really is something that changes by the day, the US immigration landscape. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're currently dealing with. There's some breaking news as of yesterday, if you haven't heard, some updates on the travel bans, so we'll talk about those. And then I want to talk a little bit about some options that hopefully, as things continue to progress and people continue to get vaccinated, hopefully things will start to level out and normalize a bit. And so we'll talk a little bit about different visa options so that even if you're not ready now, hopefully maybe in the next few months or at the end of the year, when things start to normalize, that these options will be available to you. Okay. Like Jean-Baptiste said, my name is Robert Blanco. I have a number of years of experience as an immigration attorney. I specialize in corporate and business immigration. So that's really what we're going to spend the most time talking about today, as well as the travel bans and the other topics that I talked about earlier. So let's jump right in and talk about the breaking news. So yesterday, the president issued a notice, a new proclamation that revoked Proclamation 10014. And so it's a little bit difficult to keep track of all the numbers, but this proclamation was the one that suspended entry of certain immigrants, so people who are coming in applying for green cards. So that is now revoked, and we are hopeful that soon consulates will resume issuing immigrant visas in all categories, not just the few that were exceptions. And hopefully that will bleed over into the other travel restrictions as well. But for now, we're going to celebrate this one. So what this means is, we have to give the consulates and embassies a little bit of time to resume these operations. But for those of you who have been sitting waiting for an immigrant visa appointment, for those of you who have an approved immigrant visa petition, like an I-140 or an I-130 or an I-526, hopefully this means that in the next few months, you'll be able to go and get your immigrant visas at the consulates or the embassies. So depending on where you are in the process, especially for those people who have approved petitions, now is a good time to make sure that you have everything in line. And what I mean by that is, if you have interacted with the National Visa Center and you've started preparing those documents, make sure that you have everything up to date and everything submitted. So if you've submitted documents to the NVC, they need your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, police clearance certificates. Make sure you have all of that in order and make sure that it's submitted to the National Visa Center so that they can qualify your case and send it over to the embassy. You also would need to file your DS-260, so make sure that's done, and make sure you pay the fee bill if they've issued that. So like I said, now is a good time to get all of that ready, because hopefully we will start seeing visa appointments in the next few months as they start to process this. One of the questions I get a lot is, how long is this going to take? How quickly will I get my visa? And it's just a little too soon to know. I can imagine, my expectation is that there is a significant backlog and that it's going to take the consulates a little while to work through it. So we'll have to see how it plays out, but this is really exciting news. And like I said, hopefully this is a sign of things to come, and hopefully the other travel restrictions we're going to talk about will end soon too. But for now, let's talk about some of the remaining travel restrictions. Presidential Proclamation 10052 is still in effect. This is the travel ban for certain non-immigrant visas. So specifically H-1Bs, H-2Bs, L-1s, and J-1s. It also covers the spousal visas in those categories, H-4, L-2, and J-2 spouses. That's still in effect. It was extended until March 31st, 2021. Nothing's really changed on that yet. So for now, those visas are still not being issued. But like I said, hopefully this will end soon as well. The other main travel restriction that's relatively new is the requirement of a negative COVID test. So anybody, and this applies to foreign nationals and US citizens, anybody who's getting on a plane and entering the US needs to show that they've had a negative COVID test within the last 3 days before the flight departs. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. And then of course, most people on this webinar are fully aware of the specific geographic travel restrictions that affect the Schengen area of Europe and a number of other countries. This is still in effect as well. So anybody who has been in any of these areas within the last 14 days prior to their entry in the US is not allowed in, with certain exceptions. So if you are a US citizen or a green card holder, this doesn't apply. If you are have certain US citizen or green card relatives, that doesn't apply to you. And then if you qualify for a national interest exemption, that is also a way to get around this geographic travel ban. So let's talk a little bit about the national interest exception, because I get a lot of questions about this. Basically, you know, a national interest exception is good for a single entry, and it's only good for 30 days. So the idea is not to apply for this when, you know, just to have in your back pocket. The idea is that you have a specific purpose of travel, and that your specific purpose is coming up soon, and they're giving you a one-time exception to come in for a specific purpose. My best advice for these are people are getting them. I've had clients who have received national interest exceptions, but the key is to be as detailed as possible in your request. They're fairly discretionary. You know, it's going to be the consular officer who's going to make this decision. And so you want to make sure that you give the officer who's making this decision as much information and as possible to make a decision and really grant the exception for you. Okay, so try to be as detailed as possible. Each consular post will have its specific instructions and requirements. So they may ask for you to apply in a certain way, or to send a certain email or whatnot. So make sure you follow those instructions. If you need help with that, that's something I have experience with and I can help you with. There's also a way to apply with Customs and Border Protection directly at the border in very limited exigent circumstances. So really, if it's just an emergency, you can sometimes do that. I really don't recommend relying on that. We've seen a little bit of back and forth on how CBP has been willing to handle these types of requests. For a period of time recently, certain ports of entry, including LAX, said they just weren't going to handle these at all. Now they've said they will, but I really would not recommend relying on that unless it's really an emergency and you really can't get something at the consulate. What kind of things will qualify for a national interest exception? You know, the name itself, the national interest, your travel has to be in the national interest. That's pretty vague. But the Department of State has given us a little bit of guidance. Really what they're looking at is certainly anything that's supported by the government, government agency, anything that is, has any travel that has to do with public health is certainly in the national interest and would probably qualify. Likewise, if you're coming to work for an employer that you have an ongoing relationship with, if you're coming to work in a critical infrastructure field, those are types of things that they have specifically articulated as being areas where they would approve a national interest exception. And then they've given us a little bit of guidance specifically for some of these visa categories. For example, for H-1Bs, they're going to look at whether you earn a high wage. Do you have advanced degrees? Do you have significant work experience in your field? For L1A managers, you know, are you high up at the company? Are you senior level? Have you been with the company for a long time? Does the company fill a critical infrastructure need? Same with L1Bs for specialized knowledge. Do you have specialized knowledge that's related to a critical infrastructure need? All of these things are helpful, and you really want to articulate as best as possible how your job, how your profession, how your activities in the U.S. will really benefit the U.S. To give yourself the best chance of getting this type of a national interest exception. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the U.S. Embassy in Belgium. Like I said before, that all consular posts have different processes and procedures. Some are reopening faster than others. Some are up to speed. Some are still kind of lagging behind. So it really depends, and you really want to check the specific consular procedures where you're going to apply. But if you're applying in Belgium, they are still scheduling certain non-immigrant visa appointments, and they were scheduling certain immigrant visa appointments. They should begin scheduling all immigrant visa appointments now, given the news from yesterday. And they've also given some specific instructions on how they will process national interest exceptions if you need to apply for one of those. They want you to be in Belgium. They want you to have a valid visa or ESTA approval in order to make that request. You can also make the request if you're applying concurrently with a visa application if you're doing that. And they specifically articulate the same standard that they expect you to be traveling to the US within 30 days. So make sure you have proof of your travel plans. And like I said before, just articulating as much as possible why you need this exception. Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit from the travel bans and talk a little bit about some planning for the future. Like I said before, I'm hopeful that as people begin to get vaccinated and things start to normalize a little bit, that people who really do need travel plans or have been thinking about their plans in the US will be able to act on them a little easier than they have been in the past year or two, or year and a half, I guess. So I want to go through a few of the options that will remain available and hopefully will continue to be available in the future. And talk a little bit about that so that you can plan ahead a little bit. One is the E2 visa, and the best thing about the E2 visa today is that it's not subject to the non-immigrant travel ban that we talked about earlier. So that's great. You can get an E2 visa and travel today. The E2 visa is for people who have made an significant investment into the US, into a US business that they've placed at risk. So we're looking at the amount of the investment, and we're looking at what type of business it is and how that investment is being used in the US. Okay. The US company has to be owned, majority owned by citizens of Belgium or any other treaty country. Okay. So it can't just be for any US business. The business has to have what they consider treaty nationality. So the US company has to be majority owned by a citizen of Belgium, for instance. When you're applying for an E2, we can do it one of two ways. One is if you, as the applicant, are the principal investor. So if you yourself are making a personal investment into the US business, then you can qualify that way. Or you can also qualify even if you haven't made a personal investment, if you're an employee. So oftentimes what we'll do is if, for instance, the US company is a subsidiary of a Belgian company, for example, then that can still qualify for E2 if the Belgian parent company has made an investment into the US business. And then if you are, as a Belgian citizen, can then apply as an employee of the E2, even if you personally haven't made an investment. So we oftentimes do that for even for large businesses. So that's one other option on the E2. And the nice thing about the E2 as well is that if you're coming with your spouse can apply for an unrestricted work permit. So your spouse gets an E2 visa for the same validity that you do. And they can, once they get here, they can apply for a work permit, which is really kind of a nice cherry on top. So I really like the E2. I think it's a really good visa. It's got a lot of nice qualities to it. Another option is the L1. The L1 is for intercompany transferees, and there's two flavors of L1. One is the L1A, which is for managers or executives. And there's the L1B, which is for people with specialized knowledge. Either way, you have to show that in order to qualify, you have to show that there is a corporate relationship between the two entities. So the entity abroad that you're currently working for or you have worked for at least 1 year in the last 3 years, and the US company that you're coming to work for. So that relationship can be a parent or subsidiary, it can be affiliate, something like that. And then you have to show that you meet those definitions, that you're either a manager or you have specialized knowledge, and that you're coming to the US to act in a similar capacity. The L1 is a little tough right now. One of the issues with the L1 is that if you're coming to open up a startup, they only give you a 1-year visa. It's a new office, okay? They only give you a 1-year visa. And at the end of that 1 year, they will ask you to renew it. And oftentimes that's even more difficult because immigration's definition of a manager is fairly strict. They want to see, in order for them to consider you a manager, they want to see that you have a number of employees reporting to you. And not just any employees, they want professional workers reporting to you, and they want sub-managers reporting to you. So they want this hierarchy with you at the top, and then a number of other employees and managers underneath you, managing other employees underneath them. That's the level that they like to see. And so oftentimes for a lean startup that doesn't need to hire a ton of employees, it can be difficult unless you can really scale quickly. So that's something I always warn people about L1s. We can oftentimes get a 1-year visa for a new office, but getting the renewal a year after that is really challenging sometimes. But if it's an established business and the company here already has employees and you're really coming to manage, it can still be a pretty good option. And like the E2, spouses can also apply for an unrestricted work permit. I'll talk a little bit about H-1Bs. I noticed that from the poll, nobody on the webinar is currently on an H-1B, but maybe people are thinking about it. We're in H-1B season right now, so I wanted to at least spend a couple minutes talking about it. An H-1B is for people who are employed by a US company in a specialty occupation. And so a specialty occupation is defined as something that, a position that requires at least a bachelor's degree in a specific specialty, okay, as the minimum requirement for the position. So you have to show that not only that you as the applicant have a bachelor's degree in a specific area, but that the job you're working for requires that degree, that specific degree, okay? One of the drawbacks to the H-1B is the limited number of visas. There are only 65,000 visas available every year, plus an extra 20,000 for people who have US master's degrees or higher. And so what ends up happening, at least for the last, 10 years at least, I would say, it's oversubscribed. So there's far more demand for H-1B visas than there are available visas every year. And so what happens is the USCIS ends up running a random lottery. In the years past, we used to have to actually file the full petition, and it would take them months to sort through the lottery. Now they have an electronic lottery, which is a much nicer situation, but it's still a random lottery, and there's no guarantee that you'll get selected. And when I say that it's H-1B season, I say that because the registration for the lottery is coming up in March. So it's your one time of the year to apply for the registration. It costs $10. You file the registration online. And if you're selected, then your employer can go ahead and file the petition on your behalf. If you are selected in the lottery and we file the application, it gets approved, the H-1B status doesn't start until October 1st. That's the start of the next fiscal year, and that's what we'd be applying for. So there's a little bit of lead time depending on your status in the US right now. You need to plan for that. It's often a good fit for people who are on student visas. They are often in a good position. If they have OPT and they're on their work permit, it's often a good next step to apply for the H-1B. But if you think you have if you have a job offer and the timing may work out, now is the time to really consider whether the H-1B is a viable option for you. Okay. The H-1B is good for 3 years, but it maxes out at 6 years. So you can only have the H-1B for 6 years total. So at some point, if you do get the H-1B in the next 6 years, we have to figure out a green card option for you. And the last option I'm just going to talk about quickly is the O1. The O1 is for people with extraordinary ability. You can get an O1. A lot of people say, "Oh, I want the artist visa," because that's what seems to get all the notoriety. People, think it's just for actors and actresses. It's not. It is for actors and actresses and people in the motion picture, television, entertainment industry, but it's for anyone else really in science, business, the arts, anything else really will qualify for an O1 as well, as long as you're at the very top of your field. So if you can show that you've won awards, that you earn a high salary, that you've been written about in a number of articles in trade journals or in major newspapers, things like that. If you've been published yourself, there's a number of different criteria. But if you can show that you're really at that top level, that you have that notoriety in your field, then we can apply for an O1. And one of the nice things about the O1 is that, again, it's not subject to the non-immigrant visa travel ban. There's a little bit of flexibility in who petitions this for you, whether it's your employer or whether it's sort of an agent. If you have multiple different projects that you're coming to work on. So it does offer quite a bit of flexibility, and it's really a nice option for people who qualify. So I always like to bring that in. A lot of clients don't like to brag about themselves, but this is really one where you have to do that. So if you think that that's an option for you, I can certainly look into that and give you an idea of whether you meet that threshold. So those are just a few of the non-immigrant visa options. I want to make sure we leave time for questions. But I wanted to just give you a little bit of an update on the current travel restrictions, at least as they stand today. Like Jean-Baptiste said, they could change again tomorrow. So you have to stay tuned on that. But I also wanted to give you some things to think about, at least for maybe a little longer term, so that hopefully, if you do have plans for the next few months, you can start thinking about those visa options. And again, my contact information is on the screen. If I can't answer your questions today, or if it's too case specific, please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, give me a phone call, and I'd be happy to talk about your specific case in detail. Okay.
Thank you so much, Robert, for this very complete presentation. We got a lot of data, a lot of good news with the breaking news, and we have received some questions previously by email, and we have some questions in the Q&A. So we will start by the question we received by email before this webinar. So I have one question for you. It seems very unlikely that the travel ban will be removed before March 31st. Do you have an estimate of the backlog to get an interview at the US Embassy in Brussels? The person is currently in visa EB1. I know you answered partially to that question already in your presentation, but do you have any idea on the timing of the backlog?
I really don't. I mean, it's so part of it will depend on where this person is in their process. So if they have already applied, filed the DS-260, if they've already paid their visa fee, if they have already, submitted their documents to the National Visa Center, hopefully they're further ahead in the queue, and hopefully they don't have as long of a wait. If they haven't done any of that stuff yet, then there'll be a few more months of lead time. I don't know. It's really going to depend on how busy the consulate is, and how inundated they are with these types of visa appointments now that they can schedule them again.
I think the person said that the document were submitted and she's just waiting for the appointment.
Oh, good. Okay. So hopefully they're further along in the queue, and hopefully they'll be contacted soon when an appointment's available.
Okay. Another question, under B1 visa, could you stay longer and telework in between meetings? Let's say you would normally travel every 2 months or two to the US for 1 week in the past, but now decided it's better to stay 6 months. This will limit the need for national interest exceptions for each trip, quarantine and testing. In between the meetings, you can work on the European projects remotely, but still be available in the time zone of the US clients. Sorry, it's a long one, but I think.
Yeah, so if you're on a B1, you cannot work in the US. A B1 or B2 visitor is not authorized to work. So any work, even if you're not being paid by a US company, it doesn't really matter. If you're working in the US, it's not allowed. So that's not really an option. Teleworking is not an option. If you're here on a B1, B2, cannot work.
Okay, that's clear. Another one, for the last 5 years, I've been in the US with a L1 visa, and I've been paying my taxes here. If I leave the US for a short trip, what is the best way to re-enter the US? So L1 visa.
Okay. If they have an existing valid visa, then they should be okay. Of course, it depends on where they're going. If they're going to Europe, they're still going to be subject to the Schengen travel restrictions. So it depends on where they're traveling right now. But if they have a valid L1 visa, they should still be okay.
Okay. As the consulates in Europe are still closed, what do you think about applying for a visa with USCIS? So here in the US, same company, new position plus extension.
Yeah, so we're doing that a lot right now. People who would normally travel and apply for visas who don't want to travel or can't travel, we're doing that a lot. So we file an extension of status. So you need to look at your I-94 and make sure you know the expiration date of the I-94 and make sure you file on time. But yeah, if everything is still the same, or even if it's changed, even if you change jobs, change employers, change positions with the same employer, we can oftentimes file an extension of status within the United States. And so that will extend your ability to stay in the US and to work in the US. But once you travel, then you'll need to go get a new visa at the consulate, whenever that is.
Okay. So the USCIS offices in the US are basically running, they are not open, but they are running a business.
Yeah. So USCIS is really still running as usual. So
okay.
Normal filings. The one exception is biometrics. Certain applications, especially for spouses or children who are applying for extensions of status, they typically will need to do biometrics, so have their fingerprinting done. But that's a little difficult right now. Most of those offices are closed or slowly reopening, so that's one issue. And then, but most routine extensions of status are really unaffected.
Okay. What is considered high salary for visa purposes, like the L1 visa?
So it's usually relative to your field. So like in the O1 context, if you're trying to demonstrate that you're extraordinary because you have a high salary, they want to know that it's relative to those in your field. When I talked about high salary in the national interest exception context, they're looking at whether you get paid a little bit more than what the normal required salary for an H-1B is, for example. So it's usually relative to your field, relative to your location.
Okay. Isn't more risky to apply with the USCIS than with the consulate in Europe?
That depends. I would say no. On the whole, it's not more risky, but maybe they could give some more specific reasons what risks they're concerned about.
Yeah.
But no, it's fairly routine to extend your status here in the US.
Okay. I have other question in the chat box. The travel ban is blocked until when? I think that's the $1 million question. So I don't think you have an answer for that.
Right. I mean, we know that the non-immigrant travel ban is through March 31st. So we'll see what happens after that. The Schengen, the geographic travel bans that cover the Schengen area and other countries, we don't know.
Okay. Another one. The US Embassy in Brussels granted national interest exception to me back in December when I renewed my visa. National interest to Presidential Proclamation 9996 is written on my stamp visa. If I go back to Belgium in April and apply for a new national interest exception, do I have higher chances of being granted the NEI, as they had already granted in December?
Perhaps. I don't know that there's an official policy on that saying that if we have approved it in the past, we'll give deference to it, and you're more likely to approve it in the future. But perhaps, I mean, if the same facts exist, then it could help. But I don't think there's anything official that would say that. It's more just as it relates to the discretion of the officer.
Okay. Another one for an employee. My employee has an E1 for 1 year that ended in December of 2020. And his EI-94 says February 2022. Can he still fly to Belgium and come back on his I-94?
No. He needs a new visa in order to go to Belgium.
Okay.
Or to come back from Belgium.
Okay. That's clear. I have another one. We'll take 2 more questions concerning e-visa. What is the chance of getting a national interest exception? Are metrics available on refusals or refusals? I don't know. Is in the
like statistics? Like, are there statistics on refusals? Is that the question?
Yeah, maybe. So if the person can clarify, so we can get.
I mean, they certainly don't publish. There's no official statistics or any official published data on that. All we have is really anecdotal evidence on what we've seen in our practice. What we can look at is your individual circumstances, and I can weigh in on what I've seen and what I think would work. But there's nothing, and we can look at the guidelines that the Department of State has given us, but there's no type of statistics that we can point to that says this works this percentage of the time or anything like that, unfortunately.
Okay. We have a lot of questions, as expected. Another one, currently on H1B and filled in December 2020 for green card, and it was on waiting times for green card approvals for Belgian citizens. No idea if this will take a few months or longer. Some seem to wait years.
Well, for Belgian citizens, there's no backlog in visa availability in really any of the employment-based categories. So it's really just the application processing time that you have to wait if you're reapplying. I could certainly give you a more detailed answer if you tell me what kind of green card you applied for and what you'd be wanting to apply for again. But there's no, it's just going to be the processing times.
Okay. I have another one. I've been on E2 visa for 8 years and wondering if there are a possible scenario to transition from an E2 to a green card. This is a common question.
Yeah. I didn't want to spend too much time on green card options today, but there are a number of employment-based green card options, many of which track their non-immigrant equivalents. So there are green card options for investors and for people of extraordinary ability and multinational managers and things that kind of mirror or are similar, have similar guidance, similar requirements for their non-immigrant counterparts. For E2 investors, there are a few options. I can probably do a better job talking offline to that person and kind of explaining what their options are. But transitioning from an E2 to EB5 can be challenging, depending on the level of investment that's been made, just because the threshold for the EB5 investor green card is much higher than the threshold for the E2. So it usually requires a much larger investment, more employees, things like that. But there may be other options too. They may qualify for EB1A, which is, is extraordinary ability. They may have other options. So okay. I can talk to them offline.
Sure, of course. Since we are running close to the end of the session, we will take 2 more questions. And you can, of course, contact Robert offline after the session. Does the H-1B ban apply to cap-exempt H-1Bs as well?
The travel ban, I believe it does, unless you would qualify. Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Do you have any experiences with R1 visas? Would like to change my status from F1 to R1 this year, but not sure of the exact requirements.
Okay. R1 is a religious worker visa. Yeah, I mean, I can talk to that person offline.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Robert, for all the information and answer to our session today. And I would like first to thank our audience joining us from all over the US and from Belgium. Robert, again, for your presentation and answers to your questions on very sensitive topics sometimes. We hope you had an informative time. So you will have the contact details on this slide if you want to engage more with us. Our next webinar will take place on March 19th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and the topic will be taxes, all the changes you can expect with the new administration, so you can be ready for these new tax seasons. Check your email on or social media platforms for more information. And this webinar will be available in replay on our YouTube channel soon, and the address is in the chat box. Thank you again for joining us today, and don't hesitate to reach us on social media or to my personal LinkedIn profile if we can be of any help for your business. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Jean-Baptiste. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.